some ideas for biosecurity and biocontainment for avian influenza on the dairies. And just so we're kind of all on the same page, so biosecurity is really the idea of any management practice that's going to reduce the risk of an infectious agent getting on the facility. So in simple terms, it's keeping HPAI off your dairy. And biocontainment is anything that's going to reduce the spread amongst individuals on the facility. So in the unfortunate incident that you get HPA on your dairy, trying to keep it from spreading, keep it on in as few animals as possible on the dairy. A lot of the recommendations that I'm going to be talking to you about come from, these are 3 really good websites that you can go to that'll walk you through how to make a biosecurity plan for your dairy. They have multiple different types of signs that you can print out, both in English and Spanish for, biosecure area, please stay off, wash your boots, all kinds of different things. As Dr. Lombard just kind of was talking about, the truth is that we don't really know how this virus spreads exactly. It would be great if we knew that it's these 3 things that spread it, and we could tell you don't do those 3 things and keep it off your dairy. We just don't know that yet. So what we're really doing is applying what we know about other viruses and what has worked on other viruses to keep them off dairies, and the little bit that we know about this virus, and trying to put those principles together to come up with, some beneficial practices that should help. But unfortunately, the truth is we don't know the exact things and how it's spreading. But I'll have these websites up again, but this is where most of this is coming from. These are also, there is a lot of information on these websites. It can be a little bit overwhelming, but particularly the Iowa State University website has some really good videos that also help kind of walk you through how to do some of these things as well. So with that, kind of tried to distill them down to sort of kind of the 10 practices that might be practical and that you could implement on the dairy. And these aren't going to work for every dairy for any variety of reasons, but just because you can't do all of them doesn't mean you shouldn't try to do at least the ones that you can do. And the more that you can do, the lower that you lower your risk of having this virus come onto your dairy. And the first kind of step, and I'm going to go through these a little bit more and talk about how you can do them, but really just looking at your printing out a Google map and creating what we call a line of separation around the animal facility, which may be the entire dairy, but it may be just a portion of the dairy where the actual animal facilities and feeding facilities are. And then trying to keep people outside of that as many people as possible. So, designating parking for our employees and any essential visitors. So that might be the veterinarian, the nutritionist, et cetera. And having that outside rather than having people driving all over the dairies, especially when we're talking about people that might be going from dairy to dairy as part of their jobs. And we really want to limit access across that line of separation to 1 or maybe 2 access points onto the dairy. Some dairies are already sort of designed that way where there's limited access points, but other dairies, essentially the entire road front, you could drive onto that dairy at any point, and we need to figure out how we can limit that so that we can know who's coming on and make sure that it's not just anyone or that they're doing some disinfection. And with that, establishing a vehicle cleaning and disinfection station at those access points. And I'll go through some more information on that, but we really shouldn't have anybody driving on to the dairy that hasn't, doesn't have a clean vehicle, and then some type of disinfection that we apply to that vehicle before they cross that line of separation. And then we also want to have, essentially cleaning and disinfection for the people that are crossing that line of separation, whether that be some sort of a foot bath if they're wearing rubber boots or a disinfectable type of shoe. If they're wearing tennis shoes or something like that, then we want to have shoe coverings that they can put on over that. The other thing would be providing on-site coveralls and boots for all the dairy employees. So rather than having them just show up and work in their street clothes or have coveralls that they take home and wash, we really kind of want them to have dedicated clothing and footwear that they're wearing on the facility. You know, there's some question as to whether some of the employees on our dairies are working at other dairies, maybe, you know, doing some relief work at another dairy, or they have maybe extended family or housemates that work on other dairies, and then they go home and everybody throws their jacket and their boots in the same pile in the entryway, and then you can get some cross-contamination there. Having on-site clothing for them kind of eliminates that. And then for the milk haulers, because of course, in some situations, depending on the size of the dairy or whatnot, they may not be picking up a full tank. And so then you've got milk on that tank, or that milk driver has been exposed to milk on another dairy, and then now they're coming onto your dairy. We want to have some foot baths and disinfectant that milk hauler is going to use. And then of course the rendering truck driving on that has dead cows, you know, from dairies that, you know, hopefully they're going to the known infected dairies last. But as Dr. Lombard was just saying, some of these dairies can be positive for 2 weeks before they know it and start seeing clinical cows. So if they're going and picking up cows, that's also a source of potential infection. And as we know, they drip dead cow juice, you know, for several feet, sometimes after they open up and load up the cows. You know, ideally, if it's possible, you know, during this time, we would just kind of stop purchasing cattle, if that's possible. And that's not always possible. For some dairies, that's kind of part of their business plan if they're not raising their own heifers or that kind of thing. If you have to buy cattle, if there's any way you can test them before they come on, or really buying them from either a known negative herd or a herd that's very far outside of the current kind of hot zone, if you will. And if you have to buy cattle, kind of, you know, at least finding a place where you can isolate them for 30 days on the facility so that they don't have contact. And again, I know that's hard to do, but, you know, ideally we don't want to bring anything on. Even as Dr. Lombard just said, there's dairies that have gotten it that didn't buy any cattle, but that's certainly, if you are bringing new animals onto your dairy, that's going to be a high risk factor. So getting into these a little bit more and what these concepts are and what it means. So the line of separation, you know, these are kind of a couple sort of cartoons, but it's really just looking at your dairy and drawing a line around that dairy that says everything inside this dairy or everything inside this line is the animal facility or the dairy, and everything outside of it, you know, can be dirty or whatnot, but we're not going to let anything cross that line that hasn't been cleaned or disinfected. And you can kind of think about it, your dairy is your castle, right? And you're going to build a wall and you're going to build a moat around it, and you're going to have a drawbridge, and you're only going to let the people that you want through that drawbridge that you know have a reasonable assurance are safe. So what does that look like, you know, on an actual farm, or some examples of that? And again, this is from that secure milk supply. They have their biosecurity template. So this is the example that they give, and this is what it would kind of look like. So you'd have your Google map view of your dairy. You draw in the red your line of separation, and then you're going to decide how you want traffic to move on your dairy. And wherever you decide that you're going to have an access point is where you would want to set up a vehicle cleaning and disinfection station. So you can see kind of the sort of green squares or rectangles outlined in red, and then just across from those is going to be that orange point, and so that's an access point. So this dairy's limited it to, you know, kind of 2 access points for getting onto the dairy, and then 1 access point right by the milk house for the milk barn. Up in the top, they've designated a parking area for their employees. So what we really kind of need to stop doing, as I see on a lot of my dairies, where the feeders drive on the dairy and they park in the back, kind of under maybe under some of the slightly empty hay barns or whatnot. And then you've got other guys driving and parking in, you know, maybe out by the calves if you have calves, or out by the heifers. We really want them to park outside of the line of separation, and then either get their steps in for the day and walk, or have a dairy dedicated vehicle that would then transport them back to the commodity area if it's a feeder or wherever they need to go to do their job. But we really want to limit access to vehicles on the dairy as much as possible and only let those people that really need to cross that line across it. There's different ways depending on the way that your dairy is designed that you can do this, and these websites have some different examples. So some dairies, may be able to take advantage of the facility design that they already have and set up situations where, here the milk truck driver can stay, the truck itself can stay outside of that line of separation, and there's an advantage of that because you don't have to deal with the hassle of cleaning the entire truck, and the only thing you have to deal with is cleaning and disinfection of the actual person, the milk truck driver, crossing that line of separation to go into the tank room, and with or without the hose, depending on if you have a dedicated hose in your milk parlor or if they're using a hose off the truck. And so, as I said, if you go to these sites, they give you several different examples of what these might look like, and how you can do this. But this is going to be something that's really important. And for those dairies, if you look at this dairy on the right, you can see this is a dairy where, technically speaking, it looks like along this road, you could probably just drive on at any point. And, that's something that we want to stop. And so, that can look like a lot of different ways. If you want to go ahead and, put a chain link fence around your dairy, more power to you, but that's going to be very expensive and you're certainly not going to do that tomorrow. So this can be as simple as going to your favorite hardware store and picking up, one of their 5-gallon buckets or several of them and some caution tape and putting that up to block that traffic, and printing out some entrance and exit signs to kind of direct traffic and get people used to these new patterns of traffic that you might want on your dairy for wherever you decide those access points are going to be. It doesn't have to be expensive, and these are things you can go out and do tomorrow, until you can figure out, maybe something that's a little bit more permanent or perhaps aesthetically pleasing. But the most important thing is to get this going pretty fast, especially for those herds that aren't affected yet, because we don't want them to be affected. As far as the cleaning and disinfection station, I know that can seem like a pretty daunting task, and how do you do that, especially with these big commodity trucks and milk trucks and things that are coming onto dairies. But it doesn't have to be a hugely expensive thing. The Iowa State site has a really great page that walks you through how to do this. They have a PDF that describes it, and they also have a video, and then they also have a sheet that you can print out to take to the hardware store that gives you the description of everything that you need to buy there to set this up. But as you can see here, it involves just some simple things you can pick up at the hardware store. So you want some PVC pipe or some drain tile to put on the sides to help control runoff of any water. You're going to get whatever number of tarps you need, some plywood for the tires to go over, and then for the ends where the vehicle is going to drive over, there's a couple of different options. You can buy a bunch of pool noodles and you kind of zip tie about 3 of them, and then you tuck that under the ends, and that way the vehicle can drive over it, but the water's not going to escape. They also give examples of potentially using gravel, or maybe a 2x4 or something like that to kind of stick under there and hold that tarp down and retain that water. If you look in the picture, you can kind of see up in the middle of the tarp area, sort of where the blue and the brown tarp meet, there's a bucket there. You drill a bunch of holes in the bottom of that bucket and you put a sump pump in there, and you can use that to collect the water and either drain it if you have somewhere environmentally safe that you can do that, or you can put it into some type of a container, whether that be a very large garbage can or whatnot, that you can then move somewhere to take that to the lagoon or wherever you want to safely dispose of that water that's going to have disinfectant. But as you can see here, even these milk trucks can drive over this. That way you can stop the vehicle, you can spray the tires. If need be, you can wash the vehicle. Ideally, these vehicles should be coming onto the dairy clean. You can see this picture of this truck is very clean. If they're coming in covered in mud or any other type of thing, that might be something you want to have a conversation with your truck drivers about, that they need to take their trucks to the truck washing station and at least be free of mud and other organic debris before they come on, because the disinfectant isn't going to work if the vehicle is covered in mud or other organic debris. And so if that were the case, you'd have to then pressure wash that vehicle on the tarp, let it kind of drip dry a little bit, and then apply the disinfectant. And you would want this set up outside of that line of separation, you kind of just before the access point. So still in the dirty area, you're going to clean that vehicle, disinfectant, and now it's safe to drive over that access point through the line of separation. And kind of the same thing with people. So this is one example. So poultry houses kind of already do this. And I know you're probably thinking, well, I don't necessarily have an indoor space like this for my dairy, but kind of think concepts more than this exact picture. But where can we set something up that our employees or any other visitor that's coming onto the dairy is going to have an area where they're going to either leave their street clothes, any kind of external gear like that jacket, their shoes, anything like that, and they're going to change into kind of a dedicated clothing that they're going to wear on the dairy, whether that be coveralls that they'll put over their shirt and jeans, or if you're going to supply, say, like more of a uniform that they would change into, and then as you can see, their boots would stay on the dairy, and then those are going to be laundered at the dairy. If your dairy doesn't have washer and dryer, you can go buy one. You could hire a uniform service that's going to come then pick those up and wash them for you and bring new clean coveralls or uniforms as you want to do it. But we really kind of want to limit the access of clothes that you don't know where those clothes have been. You don't know if they've had contact with other cows. So we at least want to cover them up with clean coveralls that are specific to the dairy, and leave anything, whether you set up kind of a locker room area that they can put their street clothes and jackets and things in that locker, and switch into dedicated dairy coveralls or clothing. Bless you. The other thing would be, for those people that do need to come onto the dairy, say your breeders, your veterinarians, your milk truck drivers, we want to set up, again, a C&D station for them. So they should have clean and disinfected boots, but you can set up a boot wash station. So that might look something like this, where you have a bucket they can wash. You might have a foot bath, whether that's sort of a tub like you see on the right, or they make the disinfectant foot bath pads or mats that are kind of a big flat rectangle with sort of rubber finger projections that come up, so you can sort of scrub the bottom of your boot as you walk on it. For those of you that have dropped anything off at the calf slab recently, we have a couple of those outside the receiving door for people to walk over before they come in. If it's, say, maybe just the milk truck driver, or maybe just, the hay delivery person, if they need to get out of the vehicle for whatever reason, then you want to provide them with some type of shoe covering, especially if they're wearing tennis shoes or something that can't be scrubbed the way that a rubber boot would. Provide them with some sort of shoe covering, so then they exit the vehicle in the shoe covering, they do whatever they need to do, and then when they get back in, you'd have a garbage can, they leave that shoe covering on the dairy. The other thing is really, when you think about the milk truck driver going across, especially if he's using the tube from the truck, if you don't have your own dedicated tube to transfer the milk to the truck, that milk truck driver is going to come in, he should clean his boots or wear foot covering, depending on how you want to handle that. He comes in, he gets your milk, puts that in the truck, and then before he leaves, he really needs to disinfect your tank room anywhere that he walked or touched. So you can have a pump sprayer in there with the disinfectant solution. And once he's all done, kind of the last thing that he's going to do before he leaves is disinfect everywhere that he touched and walked, and then he'll exit out the door and back into the truck. So moving on from there to talk about biocontainment. So this is, in the event that you find that you are an infected dairy, what can we do to try to at least sort of minimize the amount of cows that get infected? So, you know, as you saw, Dr. Lombard there just presented data. There were some dairies that had, I think, 7% was the lowest and upward of, you know, 25%. Locally, I've been hearing, at least from dairies, that, you know, it can even be up to, you know, 50% of the herd that they're trying to treat, whether those are, you know, truly infected cows, or, as he said, everything that kind of looks cross-eyed just gets called positive and treated. But that's a lot of cows on these large dairies, and that's a lot of milk to be lost if it is, you know, truly a 25% infection. And so the fewer cows that we can have infected, the better that's going to be for everyone. So ideally, what we'd like to do, as soon as, you know, have this idea of how you're going to do this, where you can set up an isolation pen. Maybe that's your hospital. Maybe that's, in the event that you do find out you're positive, you're going to play a little bit of musical cows and move some cows out of, you know, another pen, so that you can create another empty pen that you're going to put clinical cows in. And then you really want to milk that pen last, even though, you know, we don't exactly know how much the parlor plays a role in transmission. We know they're shedding massive quantities in the milk. And so if we can milk that pen last, that can at least hopefully help prevent some of the spread. Milkers, you know, they should be wearing gloves anyway, but they definitely should be wearing gloves now. You know, washing their hands between turns, and changing gloves between pens, just trying to limit some of that spread. You know, we really need to be limiting traffic down the feed lanes to essential vehicles. So really the feed truck. You know, I get really frustrated. I was on dairy today and the breeder's still driving down the center of the feed lane and parking his car, and I get it. But really he should be parking probably at the end of the freestall barn and then walking. For some of these really big dairies where that's a long walk, you know, if the dairy has a golf cart or something to that effect that can be used to transfer that breeder down so he's not having to walk so long. But especially someone like a breeder or the veterinarian who's going from dairy to dairy, we don't want to have them driving down those feed lanes, potentially contaminating the feed or having, you know, that kind of close contact. For our practice, you know, we're driving on, we're disinfecting our vehicles and things, and then we're parking wherever parking place is, usually kind of somewhere near the parlor, but we're not driving our truck around from pen to pen or anything like that. We're either using, you know, letting the dairyman drive us around if need be, or we're just walking. So again, using dairy specific vehicles to transport employees or visitors on the dairy. We just you don't want people just driving their cars around any more than is absolutely necessary. And anytime you can use a dairy dedicated vehicle to do that, it's going to be better. You know, we know that these cows can shed this virus in their nasal secretions and their saliva. And so you have those return lane water troughs. Whether they're shedding into the water trough, I don't think we really know yet, but you know how cows like to have their water cooler conversations with the cows that are in that pen as they're returning down the lane. Kind of what we want to do is maybe try to stop some of that. So putting up some paneling on the lane so that those cows are just going to kind of want to walk back to their pen as opposed to kind of stopping and maybe interacting with cows that are in one of the other hopefully healthy pens. Might help limit the spread. I know return lane water troughs and getting water to your house is important, and this isn't going to be something you have to do forever, but when you're kind of in the depth of that outbreak, you know, as much as we can limit any possible spread might help keep you more towards that 7 or 10% and then up to that 25%. And then here, I think, you know, really looking at how we allocate our, you know, employee assets on the dairy and our workflow. So having, you know, dedicated employees and equipment for treating these clinical HPAI cows, if we can, so that they're not going back and forth then to then go work with the fresh cows. Or if you're drenching these cows, but you also have your drench for, say, your, ketotic fresh cow or whatever, you don't want to be using those same pumps and taking it back and forth. And now you've got a ketotic fresh cow that also has HPAI. If you don't have enough employees to have a dedicated employee just for this isolation pen, at least have them complete all of their other tasks before they go to work with that isolation pen or any cows that you think have clinical HPAI, and kind of do that last for whatever their day looks like, what they have to do. And if you really can't even do that, at least provide them with some type of a disposable coverall, whether that's a Tyvek or something like that, that they can put on while they're treating those cows, while they're working with those cows, do whatever they need to do, whether that's drenching, giving aspirins, etc. And then they can take that off, throw it away to go back to do whatever else they need to do on the dairy. Another thing would be to put some type of a, cleaning and disinfection station outside on the edge of the pens. And that could be as simple as just, attaching a hose through the, most dairies have a water trough somewhere at the end of the pen. So you've got that water line, put a hose there so that when you're out, because a lot of these cows, as Dr. Lombard was talking about, they don't want to get up. So you kind of have to go out there and you have to get them up and move them to the water trough to drink. You have to get them up and move them to the shade. You have to get them up to move them to the feed bunk because they don't feel good and they don't want to do that. And then you're getting your boots contaminated. And then if you're going up and you're trying to give them aspirin or drench them or do anything else, you don't want to be taking that manure and everything that you were walking with, contaminating that feed. So that give that person a place to hose off their boots before they might go up or before they start walking around the rest of the dairy. And then again, ideally isolate any new cattle entering the facility for 30 days. So I've had one of my clients for their heifers that are returning, they have the pen on the corner that the new heifers come in as they return from the calf ranch, and then the next pen they've emptied. So they've kind of pushed those heifers down. They're a little bit overcrowded down the rest of the way, but at least we have a buffer pen so that when they first come back, they can watch them, make sure everybody looks healthy, but they're not having that immediate fence line contact with the heifers that are already on the dairy. We don't know what role heifers play, but those, that dairy is an otherwise closed dairy. So at least to kind of minimize that risk, whatever that might be. Certainly if you're buying cattle like fresh cows or springers, then we definitely want to do something like that. I think one of the biggest things that we have to think about, our dairies historically have been pretty porous. We have people walking around. If you compare it to poultry facilities where you have one entry point, in some cases they even shower in and shower out. We have people that walk all over these dairies, and we really kind of need to stop that. Especially if, like this guy, they're just in their tennis shoes and their street clothes and you don't know where they've been. And I think hopefully veterinarians, breeders, nutritionists are already on board with this and doing this, but what about the salesmen that show up and are wandering around and looking for you or whoever? I've had a lot of dairymen tell me, the salesmen are calling me, they're not coming on. But that being said, just last week I was doing herd check. I was talking to my client just outside the freestall barn. And as we're talking, he looks over and a salesman drives just straight onto the dairy, goes up by the parlor, kind of looks around, didn't see anybody, and then left. And so how often is that happening on your dairy and you don't even know that it's happening? And that's why really controlling these access points and potentially even having someone there that just sits there at least during kind of quote unquote normal business hours to stop people like that from getting on the dairy, wandering around looking for people and who knows where they've been before they came to your dairy. The other thing, if we're going to talk about biosecurity with this disease, we need to remember that it is zoonotic. And so we do need to also protect our workers. The picture on the right, if you haven't seen it before, that's a picture of the conjunctivitis that happened. So this was a milker in Texas, one of the first human cases that was reported. And that looks pretty awful to me, pretty uncomfortable. And, you know, this would be a workman's comp issue for you if they got it. And so, you know, really making sure that we provide the milkers with proper PPE, whether that be face shields or masks or goggles. And as Dr. Lombard said, there can be some issue with visibility with those. But at least, you know, potentially having masks or something that can help prevent some of that aerosolization or even splashing of milk that might get in their face. And this is also why I think having dedicated clothing for the dairy that they're wearing while they're working and not taking that home is going to be important, because, you know, even worse than this milker is if he goes home and he's got milk and whatever on his clothing, and he goes home and his young kid comes up, runs, gives him a hug and all that, and then that kid ends up with, you know, an infection. That's going to be a liability for you as a producer. And so, you know, we don't want that. So making sure your employees are trained, whether you get your HR company to come in and do that training so that you have documentation, making sure that you provide them with the PPE. You know, leave it up to each producer and how much they want to enforce that, but you need to at least be making it available and making sure that they're trained and know that they should be using it. With that, these are just those websites again, so that you can see them. They're very helpful. There is a lot of information on them, but they do all each have a template that kind of walks you through. They're each a little bit different, so you may find some more user-friendly than others. And the Center for Food Security and Public Health, as I mentioned before, they have a lot of signage that you can download in both English and Spanish, and they have also quite a few videos that will kind of walk you through how to do some of these things that I've just talked about. So that's what I